Well, hello everybody. Welcome to Mind Shifting Monday with Mitch. My name is Mitch Weisberg, and today we're going to be talking about what I think is a very important topic. It's something that quite a few people have asked me about, especially over the last year or two. How do you deal with somebody who's aggressive? And we're talking about how do you counter narcissists, manipulators, oof, boy, manipulators, con artists, and just your everyday aggressor. Let me let me set the stage right away, and let's just talk about. I'm going to pose a few different types of situations, and I want you to think about how you would naturally react if these things were to happen to you. So here's a case. I guess it's, two spouses. Okay, so one spouse, let's say your spouse, makes a large non-essential purchase without consulting you, and when you say something about it, they dismiss your concerns, and then they say that something since I earn more, I get to make the rules. So that to me sounds pretty aggressive, right? Or a coworker frequently takes credit for your ideas in team meetings and speaks over you loudly whenever you try to clarify your contributions. Again, that sounds pretty aggressive to me. A colleague constantly dumps their urgent tasks on your desk at, say, 4:30 p.m., claiming that they're too swamped and effectively forcing you to stay late to finish their work. Or your boss, all of us have had at different times, I think, aggressive bosses, right? Your boss publicly criticizes your work in front of the entire department instead of having a private session, instead of having a private feedback session, and they demand immediate sweeping changes. It's probably happened to all of us, right? Or let's talk about a parent, your teacher, and uh, a parent of of one of the students angrily demands that you change their child's grade, threatening to go to the superintendent or to the school board if you don't comply immediately. Or how about between two students? A student continuously mocks a classmate's answers during discussions, telling them to just be quiet since you don't know anything anyway. So those situations, think about what your natural reactions might be. How does your normal response work for you? So maybe a couple of you could, post answers in the chat, getting angry at the other person, giving in, um, countering the other person. What are some of the things that you've tried, and what are the things that have worked for you or not worked for you? And I'll just say, if what you're doing when you encounter situations like these, if what you're doing is working well, if you naturally feel empowered and stand tall when others try to intimidate you, honestly, you don't need to be here today. Don't waste your time. But if you struggle with this, you don't want to miss what we're covering today. Now, before we get into strategies, let's talk about what this looks in the wild. So, if you have experiences, share them in the chat. Experiences that you might have had with very aggressive people, how you reacted, or how you've seen other people react. And I'll just say, most of us, when we're faced with a narcissist or an intense aggressor, many of us naturally resort to just accommodating them. It just seems easier, right? We give in to keep the peace, especially if we feel victimized or if we feel overwhelmed. In normal relationships, we're taught to work things out, right? Person makes a demand, you don't feel like doing it, find your middle ground, collaborate, compromise. But let's look what happens when you try to collaborate with a manipulator. Imagine two acquaintances, maybe even two friends, or family members, and one aggressively demands the other watch their pet for 3 weeks. So just imagine this conversation. The aggressor, hey, I'm going to Europe for 3 weeks starting Saturday, so I need you to stay at my place and watch Buster. Oh, wow. 3 weeks is a long time. I have a lot going on with work right now, but maybe I could drop by a couple of times a day to feed him and let him out. The aggressor. Well, if you're willing to drive all the way over here 2 or 3 times a day, it actually makes more sense for you to just pack a bag and stay here. It'll save you all the driving time, and you work from home anyway, so it's really no imposition at all, and it'll keep Buster company. Collaborator. Well, it's just that I'm more comfortable sleeping in my own bed, and I still have evening commitments. What if we look into a pet sitter for the overnights and I cover the days? Wait, so you're going to make me pay a stranger for overnights when you're already going to be here during the day? You're basically here anyway. Why are you making this so difficult for me when I'm leaving so soon? And you might respond, again, trying to collaborate, hey, I'm your friend and I want to help, but I just can't commit to 3 full weeks. Let's look at the calendar and find a middle ground. Okay, so it looks like we're pretty much agreed. You'll come here and stay with Buster. You can get your work done from here, and you know how much I appreciate this. Thank you. I'll just leave the keys on the counter for you. So you see what happened, right? So the aggressor used a preemptive clause to trap the collaborator. And kind of, as I point out in my book, Mind Shifting, Conflict, and Collaboration, when someone is using a compete style, they're not interested in meeting anyone else's needs. They just want to win. Because of this, if there's a strong competitor, if there's an aggressive person, the other person who's trying to collaborate or compromise actually just becomes an accommodator. That other person will take your offers and use them as a new starting point to push for even more. And I'll just say, I learned this the hard way in my first business. I was negotiating a severance package with my business partner, and I talk about this in the conflict and collaboration book. But you know, at the beginning of the interaction, I said to him, like, hey, something, I realize you've been here for a long time. I just want to be fair. Now, he dragged those negotiations out for half a year while continuing to collect a salary. And in the end, I also ended up grossly overpaying for his stock and giving him a severance. So as we sign the papers and I hand him the check, he puts his arm around my shoulder, and he says to me, "Look, Mitch, I'm going to tell you this because I like you. But once you said you wanted to be fair, I knew I had you. You see, I wasn't interested in being fair at all. I wanted to get as much as I possibly could from you, and I did." So that's the lesson you should take from this, is that if you're going to be negotiating with another person, you need to size up what they're actually interested in. And if they're not interested in being fair, you have to establish your own line. So if they aren't, you have to change your whole strategy. So that's how I learned that when you're dealing with a really aggressive person, accommodating or trying to collaborate or trying to compromise, those are all basically end up being the same strategy. Is basically you're giving them what they want. So this is probably a perfect time to talk about the different styles one can take, because in that example that I was giving, I was trying to collaborate, and the person that I was dealing with was trying to compete. And we have a handout. I'm going to put the QR code up here so that you can download it if you want to. If I could find the QR codes, there's the uh, so there's a download here. It's a PDF, and if you download it, it's how to lead a discussion about the 5 styles of conflict resolution. And I'm going to now put on the screen here. I'm going to share the screen um, so you can take a look at it. And in that document, and let me go to, let's see, does this start working here? No, here. Um, can you see compete? Okay, so here you can see the 5 different styles. So we start off with the compete style. Okay, the compete style is where a person basically says, "We're going to do it my way." If it's your style, it's where you're pushing for what you want. Um, you're direct, you're focusing on winning, and this can be a very fast style, but it can also damage relationships and it can shut people down. Second style is avoid. Okay. And that's kind of style like I'd rather not deal with this. Okay. I'd rather hide. With that person who is making the demands for taking care of the dog, it might have been not picking up the phone call because you knew this person was going to ask you for something. In terms of friend, it's starting to avoid a friend, changing the conversation or whatever. So you're sidestepping the conflict entirely. You change the subject, you walk away, or you just let it go. It keeps the peace at the moment, but very often the issue is not going to go away. The third style is accommodate. Now, somebody who's using the compete style is expecting and hoping that the other person is accommodating, and this is where you figure out what the other person wants, and basically that's what you do. Whatever you want is fine. You give in to the other person's wishes, even when you disagree. Now, this has the advantage of preserving the relationship. But if this is what your go to style is, and if you're doing this all the time, it builds resentment. If you're finding other people are doing with this with you, it's building resentment by them. And so they're more likely to, take a look at you and use the avoid style so that they don't have to deal with your demands. So that's the third style is the accommodate. And then we get into two styles where in English, these words are very similar, compromise and collaborate. But in negotiations, they're two very different styles. So in compromise, each side would give a little. So if let's say, oh, you were at war with a country like Iran, just picking something arbitrarily, right? And you wanted them to give up their you know their nuclear weapons, their nuclear stockpile, and they wanted financial support for whatever they were doing. You might compromise, like you might ask, they might open up the Strait of Hormuz. They might give you half of their nuclear stockpile, and you might allow them to sell oil on the open market. That might be a compromise. Collaborate is where you both are trying to meet each other's needs. And so collaborate generally requires both sides to be willing to work together. And you're actually in collaboration, you're expanding the pie. You're not you're not in compromise. You're dividing the pie. So in collaborate, let's just take that same theoretic example of you're at war with another country with Iran. Collaborate might be, so, we try to understand what their real needs are, and the real needs are that the government wants to stay in power. They want to keep the ability to defend themselves. They want their people to to be able to survive well. And what our needs are is, we don't want them to be attacking Israel per se, or other countries. We don't want them to have the ability to make war on other countries. And we want shipping and international orders to proceed normally. And so we might try to find a solution that meets both of our needs. And so that would be collaborate. So those are the four styles: um, compete, avoid, accommodate, compromise, and collaborate. Uh, and you know, um, and you saw what happened in that previous example, right? The aggressor used that preemptive clause to trap the collaborator. When somebody is using the compete style, they're not interested in in meeting the needs of the other person. So, if you haven't done this yet, you can use that QR code to download the ability to discuss this with five other people. But um, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and okay, so stop sharing my screen. And let's just talk about what we could do if the other person is using that compete style, if they're very aggressive, say narcissistic or manipulative. If we know that the collaborate and compromise styles are off the table because they just turn into accommodator, what do you think our the end choices could be? So, before we dive into these tactics, let's just, acknowledge, our biological reality. Reacting or responding intelligently when we're in the moment with an aggressive person is really, really hard. When they catch us and we're not prepared, they're prepared because they know exactly what they want and exactly what they're going to say to accomplish it, and they're going to always return to that. So when but when you're the other party, when someone commands or is trying to manipulate you, it feels like a threat. And what do our brains do when a brain senses a threat? Well, our brains go into fight flight mode. And when we're in fight flight mode, they start flooding our, the all the parts of our brain um, uh, with the hormones, adrenaline and cortisol. That focuses us on the problem, but it also restricts our ability to think creatively and to think critically. And so when we're feeling threatened by this other person, we lose the ability to be resourceful. And that's why it really, really pays to think about these situations in advance if you know you're going to be dealing with somebody who's aggressive, and to come up with how you're going to deal with it when the situation occurs. And once you're prepared, you're much better able to accomplish something without necessarily accommodating. So for this to happen, we have to use our self commander, right? So when we realize collaboration isn't going to work, we have to intercept our limbic reaction. So even if we're prepared, we're going to have that limbic reaction. We have to intercept it, like, oh, here's my survival brain. I'm going to calm down. We have to center ourselves, and then we have to use positive self-talk to rehearse how we're going to respond. And it really helps to do this before the confrontation happens. Preparation is how we keep our brain from freezing. Well, so how do we prepare? Well, one way to prepare is to compete back. So we could say, something, when this person starts making their demands on me, which I know they're going to do because they always do, right? Um, I'm going to compete back. I'm going to hold my ground, and this is what I'm going to say is my bottom line, and I'm just not going to budge from it. Okay, so you proceed with a compete strategy, but you're proceeding from a grounded sage mindset. You push back and stand firm. And it could be that once they realize that you're standing firm, they will soften and they will look to come up with a compromise or collaboration. But that only happens. Uh, that will not happen if you start off with a collaboration or accommodating stance. That only happens uh, if you initially start with a compete style. A second way is if you know you're going to be dealing with somebody who's aggressive, is to avoid. You avoid the subject or you avoid the person, or maybe even tell some white lies. Normally, avoiding means that whatever the issue is, it's not going to be resolved. But if you're dealing with a toxic person, avoiding is survival. Stay away from them. Be entirely non-committal. And yes, in extreme cases with manipulators, lying to them and say, yes, maybe I'll do it or something, but that avoid strategy becomes a perfectly valid strategy because your goal, you have to protect yourself. So strategy one was competing back. Strategy two is avoiding. Strategy three is accommodating. This person is going to be making demands. This person is going to be making you feel like you have to do it, but you may decide in advance. Something, I don't really care about this issue. I don't really mind doing this work, and it's worth it for me to do it and to move on. So only use accommodate when it's the most expedient choice for you. Don't use accommodate out of fear. Use accommodate because you've looked at the other styles and you've chosen, something, in this case, accommodate makes sense. If you genuinely don't care about the outcome, or if there are other things that are far more important than fighting this battle, give them what they want and move on. You're choosing to preserve your energy. You're not yielding to theirs. And then one more tactic that very often works, and we see this with politics also, is flattery. It's important to note that flattery, it's never the only strategy, but flattery is a way of disarming the other person a little bit so that you can then, in a sage manner, move to something that's either collaboration or compete back. So it's a tactic that you use so that one of the strategies of competing back, avoiding, or accommodating actually works. Um, and the other strategy becomes more effective. Flattery, it's kind of like a variation of strength based feedback. Narcissists feed on admiration. Sometimes offering strategic flattery completely disarms them because you're giving them exactly what their ego is demanding. That opens them up, and that allows you to much more easily navigate around them. So again, those three strategies: competing back, avoiding, and accommodating, and use the tactic sometimes of flattery to set them back a little bit because they won't be expecting it, so that you can use one of the other three strategies. So I'm just curious if you have used any of these strategies. Feel free to respond in the chat. And what I thought I'd do also, if just what well maybe a couple people are responding, but what I feel I'd do also is talk about some of the experiences of people who have taken mind shifting courses and what they've done. So here's an example. If you're an educator, you've probably gotten these. An aggressive parent email. Okay, so an educator, received an email from a parent that basically ripped her a new one. Unjustly assumed she was going to fail their child. So her immediate reaction, the limbic, fight or flight reaction was to fire back a defensive response. But knowing mind shifting, she used a pause. She walked away from the email. She did a couple of laps around the halls to calm her limbic brain. And then she responded by praising the child and the parents' concern for the child. Didn't make any demands, but once she did that, the email that came back from the parents, their defensiveness disappeared, and that opened up the ability for them to work together to do something to help the child. Another example from somebody who's been in the class: a bullying colleague. The person noted that they work with a bully who takes a massive amount of effort to convince to do anything. And previously, what this teacher had done, she just avoided or ignored the bully. She took on all the work herself. It's like it's not worth dealing with this person. I'll just do it myself. She was working long hours. She's feeling put upon. But then she decided, something. Moving forward, she was going to focus and try different ways of communicating, and what she was going to communicate was just what she was willing to do and what she was not willing to do, and just leave it at that and let the other person do what they wanted to do. But she wasn't going to budge from what she figured was her line in the sand. And then she reported back that that gave her a feeling of power, and really ended up reducing her workflow. A third attending in the classes talked about a manipulative family member, and I'm sure we've all got those, right? They shared a personal struggle this with her daughter. The daughter uses self harm as a manipulation tactic when she doesn't get her way. The educator recognized that her own unhelpful scripts were contributing to this. She would catch herself falling back on toxic reactive responses that she had learned from her own mother, such as saying, you're lucky I'm not an abusive or violent person, or, you'll never amount to anything. All the accusatory statements that a parent goes through a parent's head, right? Um, Realizing these limbic responses were not helpful, after she had calmed herself down, she decided, something, the best thing that I could do is to find a counselor. And that sometimes is the best thing that you could do, is to find somebody who you trust, who will help coach you through different responses that maybe you can't come up with on your own. And then a fourth educator described working with a male music teacher, whom she described as manipulative, resentful of women in power, and prone to speaking poorly of students and staff. And she had made complaints to the district, but I'm sure a lot of women can relate to this. Like the district, those complaints yielded no results. Okay, so what she did is through thinking about it in the course, she shifted her internal script. Instead of relying on the "this is your problem to fix" mindset, she adopted the mindset that, something, more voices are better. So what she did is she built a support system of other teachers in the school. And so with these other people who were supporting her, it wasn't her fighting a losing battle on her own. She was able to draw on others who helped her win a number of these battles. So those are some of the different ways that people who've taken the mind shifting classes have found. We actually, the next mind shifting class, which is on resilience, is starting tomorrow. We've talked about that before, and then we'll be taking a hiatus over the summer, and then we will have 5 classes scheduled next year. So just, to wrap it up, you don't have to be a victim to aggressive people. You just have to stop trying to collaborate with them, recognize when they aren't playing fair, and start preparing in advance the right strategic styles to protect yourselves in advance. Now, using the 5 conflict styles here could help you do that. And I'm going to share the screen again to just go through that document a little bit, because this is a document that allows you to have a discussion on different styles of resolving conflicts with a group of people. So in your school or in your office or with a book group or whatever, you can have a discussion. And I'll just go up to the top here. It's the name of the document is "What's Your Conflict Style?" And let me just I'm gonna make that a little bit smaller. Maybe this will help. Okay, so it's how to lead a discussion. There's information about the discussion. There's timing, and then in the discussion there are icebreakers that you can use. After the icebreakers, there's 3 phases of asking questions. So the one group of questions is about helping people recognize when this is happening and discussing incidences that different people in the group have encountered. The second phase is where you talk about how people generally respond and what the pluses and minuses are, and what are the other ways of dealing with conflict. And the third is where people talk about incidences where they're likely to have conflict in the future and what they might try differently and how that might work. Um, and then, there's the closing. And I'd already pointed out that there's a handout for the participants. One part of the handout is background information, and the other part of the handout is takeaways. So next week we're going to be talking about. Let me stop the sharing. Okay. Next week we're going to be talking about supporting independent authors. We're actually going to have 2 sessions. We'll have a Mind Shifting Monday with Mitch, where I'm talking with Sophie Lechner, and then on Tuesday I'll be talking with 3 other authors. And I think that what we're all finding is that we're stuck. We only get information based on the corporate interests of all these platforms that we're using. And so how do we get information from independent people? Or if we're an independent person, how do we make our voices heard? So what I joined is a group of 55 independent authors, and we're uh, binding together in order to see how we can support each other's work. One of the things that we're doing is that next week we're going to have we're going to support each other's books and have a Kindle flash sale. We've all reduced the cost of at least one of our books, and promoting each other's books, and we're going to be talking about each other's books. So if you want to find out about some authors that you probably would never have heard of if it weren't for events like this, tune in next Monday and Tuesday, and hope to see you. Hope everybody has a great week. And I'd love to hear about examples of how different people have changed the way they're dealing with aggressive people as well. So until next week, this is Mitch. I'm signing off for Mind Shifting Monday with Mitch. And have a good week.